Welcome everybody to the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I'm delighted today to be joined by Giles Moffatt. Giles Moffatt was born in Scotland in 1972, and as a child he lived in Paris and was educated in the French system. At the age of 6, he found out he was being destined for boarding school in Edinburgh. Leaving all friends and family behind, he arrived in Edinburgh a month after his 8th birthday. His housemaster, a man called John Brownlee, brutalised the children in his care. In March 2023, following a 2-week hearing at the Sheriff Court in Edinburgh, Brownlee was found to have inflicted sadistic cruelty on young boys between 1967 and 1991. Giles set up the EA, or Edinburgh Academy Survivors Group, in 2022 with the help of Nikki Campbell and Alex Renton, and he has campaigned vocally for child protection ever since, assisting other survivors in their quest for justice and working closely with practitioners, policymakers and other campaigners. Welcome, Giles.
Thanks, Chris. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great. We've had a really interesting kind of year and a bit knowing each other and doing some work together and having a lot of conversations and supporting each other's work. So it's great to finally get this chance to do the podcast. It's lovely.
Excellent. We've actually only met once in person, and I remember being surprised at how tall you were.
Because you could only look very teeny tiny on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was
Angus
lovely.
Bell, I met Angus Bell in France, the Loreto chap, and he went, "Oh, thank God, you're not tall," because he's quite small. It seems to be our only concern is, are we midgets or giants? Anyhow,
yeah. Well, it's good to have this time together, and I usually mention at the start of this podcast kind of how we met, and we were just reflecting before we started recording. It was actually by Alex Renton, who got a shout out in that intro there. The journalist Alex Renton, who's obviously done a lot of campaigning, written some great books like Stiff Upper Lip and others, and campaigned a lot for mandatory reporting, improvements for child sexual abuse legislation, etc., which I know we'll talk a lot about today. So thank you, Alex, for that connection.
Quite right. He's definitely put a lot of people together and connected lots of dots, and we're kind of doing that in our small way within our survivor groups, and it puts a bit of power in our hands. To be honest, it's good.
Beautiful. Yeah. So let's get into it. And I always start the podcast with the kind of a journey backwards, if you like, just to get to know my guest a little bit. So, I'd love to know a little bit more about your early years, kind of how life was for you. Before boarding school. You mentioned that you came from France over here, and then how things were for you at school.
Absolutely. So I was born in Glasgow and left immediately. I mean, I can't remember it because I was a baby, but I don't remember living in Scotland at all. And my first memories are Paris, where my dad had been on a school trip when he was 14 and thought, this is a nice place. I want to live here. And so I was sort of at nursery school in central Paris, a little place called the United Nations, where we all had to hold onto a rope and walked under the Eiffel Tower every afternoon. And, it was a beautiful place. And my home, really. And then we moved out to the suburbs when I was maybe 4, would have been about that. So I started school at a French primary school run by nuns, benevolent nuns, thankfully. And I spent 2 or 3 years there. Yeah, it would have been 3. And then there were rumblings that I was heading off to Scotland on my own at some point. And, it didn't faze me particularly. I'm quite an adventurous character. But now when I look back on it, I think that actually caused a lot of problems. Having your friendship group just utterly obliterated overnight. I found a school photo from when I was 5, and weirdly I can still name the people in there. And yet I can't name the people in Edinburgh Academy photographs. It's interesting. So I had a few years there and was effectively French, and towards the end was tutored in English to try and convert me to the sort of Scottish system. I spent, again, what I thought was very unfair was during my own French summer holidays, my dad enrolled me in Glencoe Primary School during my holidays, before I joined the academy. I remember thinking that was very unfair. They're my holidays. And then the usual kind of, what's the word, cavalcade of being dragged around to buy all the things you're required to take, trunks, uniforms, musty old shops with weird men. There's almost a kind of pageantry to it, and you are, you just be sort of given your uniform, like I suppose they did to conscripts in the First World War. So in August, we came back to Scotland, August 1980, and then I noticed Wyndham talked about sort of just being left behind. That was obviously the common tactic in schools, was just to kind of quietly tell the parents to leave while the boys or girls were being shown around upstairs or whatever. So that happened to me too. And then literally from day one, the place was a house of horrors, and the housemaster was a sadist. He was violent. He was racist. He was cruel. He beat us all on our first night to kind of just break us in. We were taken upstairs because he came in after lights out, which was ridiculously early, actually. It was 8 p.m. And for those people who live in Scotland, they know that 8 p.m. in September, it's still quite light outside. So even with the curtains shut, none of us were asleep. You're in an unusual environment. You're with new people. It's quite exciting at the same time as being scary. And he knocked on the door half an hour afterwards and said, "Is anyone awake?" And of course, we're innocent little children and said, "Yes, we are, sir." And he took us upstairs, locked our heads under a snooker table, and beat us with the snooker cue. Every single one of us did a lap of the table and said, "That'll teach you to be awake after lights out." So that was premeditated cruelty, setting the tone and stamping his authority on us. And then for the next 3 years, Chris, I don't remember much. I remember the major incidents, but everything else is blanked. So I remember bad things happening. I remember maybe one or two, what's the word? I'm not going to say happy, safe occasions where we were taken out by other members of staff for day trips and things. But the environment and the atmosphere in that house was appalling. And as you said, he was convicted. Well, not convicted because he was unfit to stand trial through dementia, which happens far too often. But we did get him on every charge. So we got justice. And quite frankly, we weren't actually that bothered about seeing a 91-year-old man go to jail. It was more about getting the truth out there about what this guy was like. So we've achieved that.
Thank you for sharing, Giles. It's heartbreaking just thinking of you, moving from a safe, sort of secure French upbringing, big move over to Scotland in school during your summer holidays, and then thrust into that sort of environment. It sadly happened to so many, whether it was from a home in England to a school in England, or lots and lots of people coming from overseas, shipped in, if you like, or left behind. And that tactic of your parents sort of sneaking out of one door while you were shown something in the school, come and have a look at the common room or something like that, and then your parents would just exit stage left. Really, it was very much the done thing. Absolutely heartbreaking.
It was,
By the time you come round, which is usually that first night, because everything's a blur and your timetable to death, you kind of look up and you go, "Oh my God, I'm on my own." They went, they're gone, and then the tears come. Then the difficult stuff that happens in the dorms, etc. But heartbreaking, and that man, to have done that in such a premeditated way to the boys is it's awful. But
I mean, he did it for
thank you
11
for sharing
years
it.
in a row. You know,
Sorry.
there were many of us. There were, on average, 25 people in that house every year, 25 kids. And I've got a list of 13 who have committed suicide from that house in later life.
13
Sorry,
of
taken their own
25.
lives. Yeah, 13. 13 out of a house of 25 people per annum.
That is
So
just yeah, yeah. That
child
is
abuse,
staggering.
it
Yeah,
kills.
it does. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know we're going to come on and talk about the report about sadly so many who've lost their lives because of abuse that have gone sort of untreated and no justice in their adult lives, and the only sort of path they found is to take their own life, which is just heartbreaking. But you mentioned something that I certainly experienced, and a lot of people have, is that kind of memory void. Sort of you remember the bit before, and then maybe remember, I think I've got maybe 5 to 10 memories of a 4 year period from 7 to 11 when I first boarded. So yeah, can you just talk into that a little bit? I know you've done some sort of personal work as an adult. Have any of those memories started to come back? Has it become clearer? How was it for you?
No, no. Snippets. I mean, the things I do remember, I remember very clearly. The violence. We were locked in the garden shed for a weekend at one point. I remember people being thrown in the attic if they were having an asthma attack, so they could get over it. And lots of other things. I remember lots of bad things, but I just don't remember the. Well, I suppose we only remember certain things from the early years of childhood, but in reality, I'd say about 6 or 7 of the 9 odd years that I was at that school are a blank.
Mhm.
It was not Tom Brown's school days.
No, it was not. And as the Joy Chavrin and her ABCD, abandonment, bereavement, captivity, dissociation, of boarding school syndrome, that D of dissociation, where it's just too overwhelming, and you just check out really, and kind of
Yeah,
survive through the process. So yeah, how did you? So you were at the academy for a number of years. Did the awful treatment of the pupils there continue throughout, or was it this kind of initiation?
absolutely throughout. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely
Mhm.
throughout. Although Brownlee, they closed down the junior house. Actually, I think it was in 1983. And you know what schools are like. The propaganda that got sent around. I've got a letter from that was sent to my parents at the time, and there are references to it in the school magazine about the board of governors was absolutely delighted about the way that Mr. Brownlee and his wife had run a happy family home, much like you know their own children were looked after. Absolute lies, absolute lies. Not once did the person who wrote that actually come into that boarding house. You know,
Mhm. Mhm.
so
Yeah. So what came next, Giles? So you through the junior boarding house. Sounds a hellish, number of years for you there. What came next for you?
yeah, so that was 3 years, and then I actually went to France. I went back because my mum missed me, and um, obviously won the argument with my dad. And I went to the British School of Paris. And funny enough, I remember pretty much everything from 1984. The only music I remember is from 1984. I remember all the top films. You had Gremlins, Back to the Future.
Mhm.
Um, that's my golden year. You had Terminator, which, by the way, in France you were allowed to watch if you were 12. So that's why I got to go and see it. Things were slightly different there. And I remember a lot of the people. I remember a lot more detail from the year that I was 12.
Mm.
But here's the weird thing: they didn't. I didn't really fit in with the kids at the British School of Paris. They were all largely English expats whose parents worked for similar companies, and I was this kind of weird, probably maladjusted because of what had happened, little Scottish guy And I think I had one friend that year. It wasn't a hostile environment. They were perfectly nice kids, but I only made one friend. And they also didn't play cricket. And I missed cricket. And for whatever insane reason, I went back to Scotland. And I went back because I missed my friends, despite what had happened. And I think that's maybe quite common. You know, you've been through stuff together. You are veterans of the same hostility. And I also missed cricket. The only thing I enjoyed in the prep school at the academy was cricket, basically. I discovered that. I mean, I'd never heard of cricket until I went there, but I discovered that I could bowl, and it turned out my grandfather was quite a good cricketer, and so I enjoyed that. And they didn't play that in Paris, and I went back. There was also the fact that I was moving into a different house, so there was no prospect of Brownlee at all, and I was in the senior school by then. So I went back, and it was a very different challenge because it was now all about peer on peer. You know, all those boys who'd been through the junior house and brutalized just turned into savages and formed factions and tribes. And there was almost this kind of merry-go-round where it was someone's turn to be targeted. And if you spotted them being targeted, you kind of joined in because you thought, at least it's not me this time, you know? So there were a few years where it was just savage, a lot of inter-boy violence. The staff were better at this point, but you're getting bigger and, you know, they're less inclined to thump you. And, you know, in the instances where some of the boys who were sexually abused, as they go through puberty, they lose their appeal to some of the abusers, you know. So it just turned from kind of staff on children to us taking it out on each other. And really only things stabilized in the last 2 years of school. So when you're doing your A-level, and what's interesting, what I noticed was that for the first kind of 6-7 years of school, you're all trying to conform and be the person that the school thinks you should be. So you've got to be good at science, great at sport, blah, blah, blah. Of course, some people are artistic, some people are musical, some people are super sporty and not that bright. So, but we're not all the same.
No.
And in the final 2 years of school, when people were doing their A-levels, that was when we all just left each other alone. So the artists did their thing over at the east side of the school, and they were happy. And the sportos won their rugby matches and cricket matches and stuff like that. And the boffins were in the chemistry labs, and those of us who were into literature did our thing, and you were accepted by them, and they weren't trying to morph us into a sort of hit the youth type model, you know. So that was it really. And I'll be frank, I enjoyed certainly the last year of school because I wasn't beaten up or abused. I was treated with respect and decency, and I think nowadays if you board for the final 2 years, I think that can be okay, because it's a bit like going to a sixth form college. It's getting a bit of freedom early on. So I don't have an issue with that. And funnily enough, all the guys who boarded and came for the final 2 years, no one bothered them. They were just, you know, you are who you are. Slightly different picture with the day boys, where there was still an element of, you know, you were an outsider. And I felt particularly sorry for the girls. We had girls in the final 2 years, and they had a hell of a time because, of course, thrown into an environment which is just full of unhappy, angry boys. But yeah, I did enjoy the last year. And then, of course, the thing over that is that for the next few years, you have this kind of sense of identity as partly belonging to the school. So, if you didn't leave abruptly and finish finish the course, you had an element of loyalty to the school for a while. And it took me a few years to realize that I shouldn't be quite so loyal to that place because of the way we were treated early on. But it's you had nice people who inspired you, as well as sociopaths who tried to destroy you. So I tried to be balanced about it. And in fact, a teacher from the academy, a guy called Alex Zambellis, changed my life. He saw that I had some kind of ability in English, encouraged me to do more. I ended up doing English Lit as a degree at university, and came top in the class, and got a first at the end, and enjoyed it. So there's always good and bad, isn't there?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Giles. Yeah, I think you've highlighted that really, really beautifully. And ultimately, there's something we'll come on to is about the institution itself, the kind of the establishment, the institution, it protecting itself and its good name and etc. above all else. But what that does is, there are good people in those systems, in those institutions, who are, maybe great teachers, inspirational, benevolent people. There is the challenge, of course, though, is that they must know. You know when you're in the presence of a sociopath. You know when things aren't right. You can see young people shutting down in front of your eyes. And what is heartbreaking for me is that without things like mandatory reporting, which we'll talk about, that sadly, good people look the other way, or they feel, look, if they leave the institution, then the kids are truly on their own. If the good ones
Yeah.
are gone. So I know people who've stayed in really quite toxic school environments because they just couldn't leave the kids, but they also didn't feel that they could exercise any change for the people who are abusing, or the people who weren't doing a good job. But you also importantly shared about those last 2 years, the 16 to 18 sort of A levels. I've heard that again and again. And actually, as you say, with boarding, the big challenge is junior boarding is going to do harm to young people, even if it's a benevolent environment, which yours clearly wasn't. Because of the abandonment wound. But then as children get older, again, they say, okay, well, is it okay from 11, 12, 13? Well, you're going through puberty at that point. You need an awful lot of support to go through that phase. I would say, again, that is going to have an impact, being sent away from home during that difficult process.
It's
when
interesting
you're
that you use the word sent away. Sent is a bad word, isn't it?
It is. It's a tricky word. Yeah, I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I chose to go to school." The psychological angle on that is that you can't possibly know the full ramifications of your decision until you're, mid to late teens, really. So
Yeah.
that advocates for this view that 16 to 18, you go and do your sport, you do your military stuff, you prepare for university. The harm, providing it's a decent environment, the harm factor isn't there. But I thought it was powerful that you brought that up.
I mean, the good news, Chris, is that I think something like 0.7% of children in the UK are actually in the private school system, of which a low percentage, more in England but less in Scotland, are boarders. And amongst the boarding population, roughly 2% are under the age of 11 now. And they're maybe there for different reasons. But have you read the Philip Pullman novels, The Golden Compass and things like that?
No, I haven't. I've seen the films, I think.
The sort of mythology, the storyline is about children having their demon, and their demon is a little furry friend who is their kind of alter ego, who's always with them. And the White Witch is trying to catch children and sever, with this very high-powered laser, sever the demon from them to make them to turn them into workers, basically. Effectively, removing their innocence and personality and childfulness. And that's really what happens when you go into an environment like that. And even if it is benign, as you say, you are being torn apart from the child that you should be to a certain age. And I speak to lots of survivors, and we have lots of catch-ups on teams and things like that. And I'm not looking at 50, 60-year-old men and women. I'm looking at 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds. They're stuck in time. I'm stuck in time. And it's quite difficult to get out of it, but it is possible, but it's going to take a while. So yeah, it's a particularly vicious. Well, let's look at it this way: there are convicted terrorists who have fought extradition successfully on the basis of the human right to a family life. Did we have that? No. That's absurd.
No, thank you, Giles. Very powerful. You mentioned something the other day. We were interacting, and it was around timetabling. I think I made a comment that, although the schools have improved significantly in the main on safeguarding terms, it's not perfect, but there is improvement there. And there is, more introduction of wellbeing welfare programs, although sometimes mainly for the prospectus and the photos than the reality. But one thing that hasn't changed much is the ruthless timetabling, the kind of 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. schlep where you just never stop. You never get to kind of just crash in a corner and read a book or stare at the ceiling. And you resonated with that. I remember you saying, God, yeah, I hear that. It sets you up for something in adulthood. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, to be honest, I didn't think it was particularly unpleasant at the time because it keeps you busy, I think it may have harmed my ability to relax. I have to, we go on holiday. I'm fidgeting and heading off, visiting places while everyone else sunbathes. I still get up at 4 a.m. and fill my day with things, some useful, some pointless. I think the point I was trying to make actually was more the amount of time that you're in a hostile situation per day. Yeah. So 7 a.m. till 9 p.m. is 14 hours. Sleep is the only time where you're not under threat. And even then, things like dorm raids and bog washes or being punished in the middle of the night by being dragged from the bed and walloped for some minor error that you had not explained properly. You weren't safe in bed either. So it was more about the exposure really to threat and danger. And that was continuous. I mean, I boarded, so the first 3 years, 7 months of the year, I was there 24 hours 7 months of the year. That's that. I liken it, without apology, I liken it to a prisoner of war camp. Not just the incarceration, but the permanent fear and the constant threat of attack, basically. And I use words like torture to describe what happened to me and many others. So, yeah, my point about the amount of time, there was just no relief, really. And even sleep, which ought to be a time where you feel safe or feel nothing, was hampered.
Yeah, I hear you, Giles. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so there's really two aspects there to timetabling. There's the no escape part, which you're talking about, and the length of time. And the idea really is that a human being is only equipped to be in stress for, a short amount of time. Then we're supposed to get somewhere safe. The fight flight has happened. Then our nervous system relaxes. And sometimes stress plus rest equals growth. But stress plus stress plus stress equals burnout, and it equals complex trauma, and it's the inescapable and overwhelm of it that comes into the kind of complex post-traumatic stress stuff. And without diagnosing everybody like this, because I think probably we have rather a lot of names and labels for what is effectively just putting young people into a battleground childhood that they can't escape from, and it does a number on every element of them on a soul, emotional, physical level. It's you mentioned that, trying to get those parts back, and you're talking to 7-year-olds or 10-year-olds. The soul recovery process, or the inner child recovery process, is so long. You have to literally bring those parts back home, because they are frozen in time. They are stuck. I always describe it as they're stuck in rooms in a house. The room shuts when a trauma memory is created, and they will stay there until you go back and get them out. And you can actually do that as a process, but heartbreaking. But you did allude there to kind of the work that you're now doing to support people. So let's transition into,
Yeah.
how you got to do that, because you are really, really active in what you're doing now. So as an adult, you're coming out of this battleground childhood, this experience, English lit, passionate about words. Kind of how did your early years show up in your life, and what did you go on to do?
As with anyone, I assumed my course in life was normal and determined by my own character flaws or skills. For a long time, I didn't twig that my actions, my behavior, my lifestyle as an adult had any kind of link to abuse. I was always angry about Brownlee in particular. And, I mean, there are lots of people that I meet. There are many conversations that have taken place over 3 decades in pubs about, causing him permanent harm. That's how strongly people felt about it. But throughout university, early years, I didn't kind of do the arithmetic. University, I found out only just recently that it's very abnormal to live on your own. And I lived in a 1-bed flat. Sorry, it was a 2-bed flat, but I lived on my own with no housemates for 4 years, from 18 to 21. And I was comfortable that way. It was lonely, but I was comfortable that way. And it was only recently that when I was speaking to a psychologist, they said, that's really unusual. Kind of university is about making friends and going out in the world. And I said, well, for me, the sound, I couldn't be in halls or shared accommodation because the sound of footsteps in a corridor were the sound of trouble. But I hadn't worked that out. I thought I just stayed in a flat because my parents happened to have a flat that was empty. But it was definitely a choice that was influenced by, and I get it more now because I'm very sensitive to noise. I live in the middle of nowhere. If I hear even the postman coming up the driveway, I'm like red alert. Even and I don't mean this badly, but when my kids are at home and up and down when they're coming from university, it stresses me out. Just the noises in the distance. It's great to have them home, but just the kind of noises at night are still a problem. And I'm 53, so yeah. So I kind of the upside of being a hermit at university was I studied hard and did well. That's an upside, but I don't think I'll give Brownlee the credit for that. I think I also did well because I wasn't being abused by people who were teaching me or anyone I was studying with. Slightly different circumstances. Then I went into advertising, and I was just talking about that yesterday with somebody. Was probably the wrong career because in the 90s it was full of shysters and backstabbers and some brilliant people as well, but there were lots of, it's one of those professions where you could do well if you maneuvered yourself into position well. You're in marketing too. It's because it's not technical like science or accountancy or whatever. There's an element of subjectivity to it, and it attracted egotists and dishonest people. And it was the dishonest people that really I could not handle in any way. So you go into, I went from a sort of solitary situation at university where if you wrote good work, you you got good marks. So I arrive in the work environment completely untrained for diplomacy, politics, tolerating, people who are lying, or who aren't straightforward. Particularly when the abusers themselves were people who groomed parents to believe that they were nice people. They would put on this face when your parents arrived to pick you up, so that if you told them anything, they would never believe you. They'd say, he's a charming man. What are you talking about? And the same applies to Ian Wares, who's the paedophile trying to get extradited from South Africa. He was, he was very suave and close, sidled up to many of the parents of the people he was abusing, and I know that goes on, with paedophiles, particularly today. They groom those around them. So I go into a work environment where suddenly it's a hostile situation again. People are not being straight. People are trying to get one over me, and I'm there going, hold on, I thought if I just do excellent work, then I'll be valued. that was a learning curve. I did find, so I worked in a number of ad agencies, and I did find places where the people were not like that, and they valued my work, and in fact, they probably let me off a few things that I shouldn't have been let off if I'd been in other places. But what I've seen with quite a few of the other guys in our group is this pattern of, what's the word, kind of bad behavior in the workplace because you're intolerant of bullshit, basically. I strangled someone over the Christmas lunch table, and one of the directors, because he was being dishonest. One of our other guys has, I think, been fired a few times for headbutting his boss. It's not funny, but if you knew him, you would think it was funny. But that's a symptom of frustration and intolerance of people who just are not honest with you. So that's, it damages your work life. And gradually over time, I ended up kind of doing more kind of solo things like consultancy roles, and where I come in and I leave it, and it's a fixed term thing, and I'm not jostling for position with other members of the company. I'm there just to do a specific job, and that I found comfort and safety in that, basically.
Thank you, Giles. I can resonate with so much. I'm sitting there going, yeah. Even to the point I remember moving into university. First 9 months of university, just moved into a flat on my own. I couldn't.
Oh, you did?
I couldn't contemplate the idea of being in anything that looked like a dorm.
No.
Or anything like that. Finally, then I made a good friend, and then it was gently. It was kind of me and him for a bit, and then it was a bigger place. But I struggled with it all the way through. And the noise, my insomnia was prolific until about 4 or 5 years ago. Just on red alert all the time. As you say, that hypervigilance stays. It really stays, and the inability to sit still. So thank you for sharing that. And the workplace stuff, I look back at some of the things I said and did over the years at work. I was always trying to work my way to the top to try and get high enough so that I couldn't be bullied anymore, or could call the shots. And I was very perfectionist, very hard line. All the rest of it. So it's tricky, isn't it? And it, for me, coping was booze. It was gambling. It was I was a chain smoker, junk food, all the rest of it. What were your poisons of choice? And
well, probably above average booze in my 20s. Funny enough, I didn't really drink that much at university. Well, I wasn't exactly socializing that much. I do have a few good friends from university, probably the best ones I have. So I'm not saying I was a kind of hermit throughout, but I didn't socialize certainly for the first 2 years, and had a very small group. In terms of drinking, university was more kind of the odd Friday or whatever. You couldn't really afford to get particularly smashed, certainly not on a daily basis. The first couple of years I worked in advertising, I was pretty calm. Then I kind of got drawn into the culture,
Mm.
and there was an element of, well, if you didn't go boozing with the boss, then you're being talked about behind your back, and you ain't going to get promoted. And they did, and they did. I mean, people did things like that. I worked my nuts off on the launch of a product for Yoplait, and took a week's holiday. And while I was away, my boss's boss called an all-staff meeting and presented the work and took the credit, and had nothing to do with it.
Mm.
So yeah. Where were we going with that one? Sorry.
No, it's okay. We're just sort of just looking at kind of the coping strategies and things,
Coping
that,
strategies. Yes,
yeah,
alcohol.
you mentioned
Yeah,
anger, working through.
yeah. I'd have outbursts, and the and I don't know that I was abusing myself, but I was certainly not looking after myself in my 20s. I did plenty of sport, but I'd come home at night and I wouldn't bother cooking. I'd just have a bottle of red wine,
Mm.
and go to bed and get up in the morning, and maybe lunch would be my only meal.
Mm.
And then things got worse when my children first went to school. That's when things got worse. I didn't realize it at the time. This would be about 2008 or 9, I think. That's when my self-abuse really kind of went upwards. Alcohol. I fell in with people who had easy access to narcotics. I got addicted to hydrocodone and tramadol and things like that, because that was a good way of. It's the equivalent of drinking a bottle of vodka without getting drunk, and no one notices. You're just numbed. So going into a school environment clearly triggered something, and actually, a lot of it was because I didn't resent, but I could sense the happiness in the school compared to what I'd been subjected to, and what a load of us been subjected to. And things like, carol concerts where everyone's just glowing with joy. And I'm like, I had to leave. I had to leave early.
Mm.
I couldn't cope with it, and had to
Mm.
sadly kind of keep a bit of a distance from my daughter's education, in that sense. And I think that's the transgenerational damage that bullying and abuse can do. There must be many chief execs of city banks who have very tenuous relationships with their children because they are themselves not qualified, because they had dysfunctional childhoods. You see them in the restaurants of Wimbledon on a bank holiday where they're just on their phone working, and the kids are all sitting there eating Pizza Express or whatever. So it's there's a lot. There are many more victims of abuse than the victim himself or herself. As Philip Dundas said, he said there are many. Abuse has many victims: family, friends, sisters, siblings, brothers, parents, grandparents, grandchildren, dogs, colleagues. We lash out, or can lash out, in ways that really kind of ripple sideways.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Giles. I can resonate with a lot of that. Yeah, absolutely can. Just the coping strategies and the ways of doing things. It's heartbreaking. And yeah, I know. I look at I really started the fast track to my breakdown when my kids hit the age at which I was when I went to boarding school, and it tends to be a number of. It's either that or when people's parents pass away, there's no one left to protect anymore. They'll start looking at this stuff. The breakdown might start happening. They'll start looking at their trauma, their abuse, their boarding school stuff. Sometimes it's a big emotional health or physical health thing. But there's this kind of unraveling. And for me, I was just looking at I was totally subconscious. But you look at your children, you look how sort of fragile they are and how much they need you, and you think, I had nobody. There was nobody there. They're bringing everything to you. and you think, God, I had nowhere to go with this stuff. And as you say, my girls' primary school was a lovely little place.
Yeah.
It was happy, it was safe,
Mm.
and all those wonderful things. And I think there was a part of me that still had that, like, wow, you got it so bloody easy. The subconsciously. So, giving them a hard
Mm.
time, being a perfectionist, sort of helicopter parent, always keep steering them. And I look back on it now, I think, God, poor things. But luckily, it's not too late to help them and unravel that. But thank you for highlighting this idea that ex-boarders, abuse survivors, it ripples out. And let's move now to that. So you mentioned a bit about your abuser, about the court side of things, going through the process. So can you talk sort of from that? How did you get from your own personal legal battle or legal experience into helping others, getting involved with the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, etc.?
Okay, yeah, it didn't quite happen in that order, but I'll go through it. So, by some weird twist of fate, in 2006, I was responsible for the Scottish Government's child protection advertising campaigns at the agency that I worked at. And a very good friend who is now at the Scottish Government worked in my team at the time, and she said, look, we should probably speak to people who've been abused if we can find them. And I said, well, just speak to me. And she almost fell off a chair. And I told her what had happened. It's all in my witness statement. I told her exactly that back then. And she was very upset about it. But it helped inform the strategy behind what we were doing. And many years later, she got in touch with me and said, listen, there's going to be an inquiry. So this was probably around 2017 or 2016 when it actually started. You should come forward. And I had a look at the website, and it wasn't covering Edinburgh Academy. It dismissed it as a day school, basically. And I just thought, oh, look, it's just a kind of, a box-ticking exercise. I can't be bothered. It's a waste of time. So I ignored it for a bit. And then in 2021, March 2021, I woke up probably in a bad mood and thought, this is outrageous. They should be looking at the Edinburgh Academy. And I fired off a sort of 4-page mini statement saying this is what was going on. And nothing came of that for a bit. And then I was invited to come and give a witness statement. And that was before Nicky Campbell appeared on the scene. I didn't know Nicky Campbell was at the Edinburgh Academy because he was 10 years older than me. But he and Alex had done a couple of sequential podcasts about the Ian Wares issue. And I read an article that said, this abuse was going on in the 1970s. And I thought, whoa, hold on, I was there from 1980 to 1990. So I got in touch with Alex through another friend who knows him well. And he put me in touch with Nicky Campbell. And we spoke. And he said, look, there's another WhatsApp group type thing where people are, I think it's the Fetties guys or whatever. There's a few of them on there. Can you set one up for EA guys? And I said, sure. And it went from 3 to 7 within a week to 35 within a month. And because of all the media coverage, which thanks to Nicky Campbell's profile, the media were interested. Some of us who had media skills did kind of orchestrate a lot of the distribution of it. And, thank God for my time in advertising. And we also had a few brave people who were quite happy to be spokespersons. So Neil Douglas talks a lot about the Wares prosecution, the Wares situation. Neil Russell appeared on Panorama with them. There were quite a few people willing to kind of put their front foot forward. And Ladysmith, because of the media coverage, decided that there'd be a special hearing for the Edinburgh Academy. That wasn't planned. So that was August 2023. So it was almost a year after I spoke to Nicky Campbell. the first time round. He did his podcast in July 2022, but yeah, it was not quite a year. No, it is a year. It's just over a year. What am I talking about? And in that year, the group grew, and we were in very close contact weekly. And really, at the time, it was more about how do we. The first thing we noticed was, oh my God, I'm not a freak. These are symptoms that we've all got. So there was a real sense of kind of belonging and no absolute trust just in people, absolute trust, unconditional. And then we helped each other prepare for things like giving witness statements. So those of us who were further down the line explained what had happened and how it went on, and not to be worried about the process. And then the witness, what do you call them? The witness support officers at the inquiry are perfectly nice people in the main. And there were some people who had sued, taken sort of civil cases against fetis, and they recommended some law firms. So there was some chat about, how to go about that. We were very careful not to discuss particularly individuals' cases. If we had, we'd be there for thousands of years. We were actually the great thing about the group was a coming together of people who were able to take on the legal challenge with an element of knowledge and understanding, take on the inquiry with an element of strength that we wouldn't have had if we just all turned up on our own. And we didn't have any reservations about the inquiry until they published their first report on a private school, which is Loretto in Musselburgh in East Lothian. Alistair Darling was there, Andrew Marr. It's quite. And the previous reports about the religious institutions had been damning. The reports about the orphanages were just cursory and damning. Reports about Bernardo's, Aberlour, and Quarriers, again, large state-supported orphanages on the west coast of Scotland. Damning, bleak. And then the Loretto report came out, and Lady Smith starts off by saying, "I want to emphasise that many people had a great time at Loretto and will be and have been very successful ever since." And I thought, what's that got to do with the abuse? She then goes on about 84 acres of leafy campus near the sea. Pinkie House is worthy of mention. It's got an ornamental ceiling. It's arguably Scotland's finest Renaissance villa. And we're going, what the hell is this? I got a call from one guy going, how do I apply? I'm going to get my daughter to have another baby so I can put their name down. It's like, it sounds amazing. And the abuse was there, but it was diluted big time. So that was really the first time when we went, whoa, wait a minute. And when if you read the next report, there's a lot of explanation as to why the Edinburgh establishment may have behaved like this. To go from trashing the place, it didn't matter whether children were not from the upper echelons of society, and trying to kind of balance the books for Loretto in particular. Since then, she calmed down. Every other case study on private looks pretty and could be. You could just change the names and they'd be all the same. But we're watching because there is a bias in the way that inquiry is being led and run. And our report, which comes out probably at the weekend, I'm just waiting on Tom Perry to get back to me on some changes to the section on mandatory reporting. We'll cover what we've learned in the last year. If people haven't seen the first report, that's probably more useful to read that first, because it's actually about insights into survivors and how we've helped each other as a group. And if you're in the early stages of kind of tackling what happened, that's a good place to start. The second report's a bit more detailed, but it shows probable scandal at the heart of what's been going on in Scotland. And I think next year is going to get even worse. But we are onto them. And the reason we're onto them is twofold. One, it was pompous, snobby, denying establishment figures in Scotland who covered up abuse in the 70s and 80s. They passed teachers from one school to the other and they abused again. They protected the reputation of the institution above all. And we're not going to let that happen a second time round. And that's our motive. But the other motive is that the people from guys who were abused in state care or foster care have ended up having far worse lives than any of us. You know, they've been through the criminal justice system. They haven't got the confidence, or if anything, the inclination to engage with people like Lady Smith or policemen or judges or lawyers. You know, they don't trust them. And we feel that because we were given this voice, just a unique opportunity that came completely by chance. If Nicky Campbell and Alex had done nothing, I'd have gone on my own and left on my own. We'd have all have gone on our own and left on our own. Instead, we've been able to join some dots, right some wrongs, and try and help others who haven't got the momentum or the numbers or the skills or the confidence or the energy, quite frankly, to hold the marriage account.
Thank you, Giles. Yeah, thank you. And for those listening, you know what the Edinburgh Academy survivors and now sort of bolt-ons from a number of the other schools and the wider group, the survivors group, you know, takes in those from English schools and other schools, doesn't it? And so there is a support network there. And last year's Edinburgh Academy Survivors Report is available on Seen and Heard. It's a really powerful piece of work. And as Giles referenced, the new report is coming out very shortly. So just to put that in context for what kind of Giles does, as well as lobbying Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, speaking out on behalf of children and their safety, you know, and just connecting survivors together so that there is this feeling that people aren't alone and that you can share a bit. So, yeah, bless your work, Giles. It's you know, in the year and a bit we've known each other, so much has come out of your you know, what started as, you say, 3 people and then 7 people, then 35. I think it's well over 100 now, isn't it? But
it certainly is.
It's been very powerful for people. So
Chris, it's probably worth touching on mandatory reporting as well, because I know you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah.
Very quickly, members of various of the survivor groups sit on the panel with the Home Office and sit on advisory panels with the Scottish Government, policymakers. We are all dead keen for mandatory reporting to be implemented as well as possible. When we were young, like many people, there was no outlet. There was no kind of pressure valve. There was no mechanism for reporting it to anyone. If anything, your situation would get worse if you reported anything. And we were suppressed. You know, I talked about propaganda earlier, glossy magazines, lies being told to parents, the mandatory reporting, because young children still, the one thing that wouldn't have changed about young kids is that they believe adults and they're easily fooled into believing that adults are doing the right thing, even if it feels wrong. And many children don't know that they're being abused. It's because it's their only normality. It's their only reality. Unless things are absolutely chronic or spelt out to them, they might not know that they're being abused. We didn't think we were being abused. We just thought this is the system and this is what adults do. So that's really important. No one, the child will not speak first. And that's why mandatory reports are really, really important. Other people have to step in and do it for them.
Yeah, thank you, Giles. So coming on to mandatory reporting then. So England, UK, Great Britain, one of the very few sort of developed nations for it not to be illegal to fail to report the known or suspected sexual abuse of a child. It's a national outrage. It was flagged in the independent inquiry into child sex abuse 3 years ago as being one of the 20 recommendations. Nothing's really happened on it. There's just a very weak, watered down version out there. But what we're talking about here is that if an adult who's in a regulated activity, a regulated role, so teacher, house parent, looking after a childminder, etc., suspects or witnesses or is told about the sexual abuse of a child, that they have a legal obligation to report that to the correct place, which is to the local authority, the LADO, the local authority designated officer. So not inwards and upwards within the institution to the head of the institution who might kind of move people on and whitewash it, etc., but report out to the correct place. And if you fail to do that, people like Tom and Jonathan at Mandate Now, who you mentioned, are advocating that there needs to be a legal ramification for failing to report. There also needs to be protection for whistleblowers, so that people can blow the whistle easily and get it done. It needs to cover both known and suspected abuse.
Absolutely, because
so with that being,
sorry, Chris.
I was just saying, with that being effective mandatory reporting,
yeah.
in fact, there is none. So where do you sit with this?
Well, I'm aligned with Tom and Jonathan that it needs to be far stronger than the Home Office's proposals, which won't change, but at least we've got an opportunity to introduce something robust in Scotland. And the great thing about the Scottish Parliament, or the annoying thing about the Scottish Parliament, if you're English, is they like to think up there that they are more progressive than Westminster, that we're more green, we're more socialist, and I think there is definitely a will in the cross-party group, in the policy, the policy groups, to do something better in Scotland than is taking place at Westminster. And maybe once it's proven that it actually was a force for good, then the rest of the UK will catch up. Jonathan and Tom have got evidence from around the world that it doesn't unduly put pressure on systems. And there's a moral issue, an ethical issue with the protection of the system. Is that more important than the protection of the child? Where do we stand on that? I think that's unforgivable. And they've looked into the increased volume of referrals and things like that. And a good system can be well designed, and it will actually improve efficiency over time. So, we have no means of speaking ourselves. It's absurd that anyone's actually debating how to introduce it, but that's the way politics works. It trundles slowly. Hopefully the guys in Scotland have really got the message and will want to be seen as a kind of beacon on this.
Yeah, thank you, Giles. That's so important. As you say, Westminster and the independent inquiry to child sex abuse, the 20 recommendations, that is, pedestrian at best. That there is mandatory reporting kind of in name on the cards, as 3 out of 20 that have got some sort of momentum behind them, but it's so watered down. It's all around the DBS system. There's no legal penalties. It doesn't cover both known and suspected. It's a I heard the lawyer Dino Nocivelli call it a chocolate teapot. It's just like it's not worth the paper it's written on. So there is some serious work to do there, but I know we both sit on sort of panels and things like that for groups like Survivors Trust Act on ICSA, or ICSA Changemakers from NSPCC, as they were, who are trying to get something to happen here. But it's the institutions, it's the sort of the old boys networks, it's the cover-ups that we've become sort of addicted to and used to in the UK. Can you speak to that? The inability to get things moving because the people in charge of these inquiries, etc., are often coming from the system themselves.
So I differentiate between the slow-moving wheels and cogs of government And I've heard it directly from the minister responsible that, you can't change things overnight. That seems to be what's the word? It's a sort of typical received wisdom in government, is that you can't change things overnight. Well, that's not true, because things have changed overnight on many occasions, but it usually comes when something bad happens and something big happens, and the victims of whatever it is, like the post office scandal, for example, are cause embarrassment to the authorities. So politicians bend to public pressure at some point. But I accept that you've got civil servants working against politicians and working with them. I can't really comment on the machinations of government, other than there's definitely a will in Scotland to do it differently and better and quicker. In terms of institutions, you talked at the very beginning, actually, about sort of cover-ups with the Edinburgh Academy and the way things had been. I'd like to point out that the current management of the Edinburgh Academy have been the opposite of their predecessors. They have been open, compassionate, decent, humane. As late as the early 2000s, I've seen material that is basically denying that there's any knowledge of anything from the heads of the time, and suggesting that if you come in for a tour of the school and we give you a cup of tea, all will be well. We know all was not well, and it's not the fault of the current management. Institutions do not need to be defensive. They should accept, if survivors come forward, they're not making it up. No, we didn't get together kind of as part of some kind of conspiracy because so-and-so stood on my toe in a chemistry lesson or whatever. We were fully abused and didn't even know each other by the time we got together, So the cover-ups still happen. That's the problem. If you read the next report that comes out, there's a detailed there's a detailed account of what went on in the 1990s, and it's not. I don't know, if you've got schools that are run by ex-private school people, and I speak kind of, I'm describing myself here, but I'm now aware of it. The typical private school boy in particular, is conditioned to give the impression that everything's much better than it actually is. How did the rugby match go? Really well, sir. Actually, no, sir, we lost 243. Right, you're all idiots and you're going to get a beating. You have to basically talk things up, and it's embedded in the psyche of many of the English public school boys of the 70s and 80s, and even other nations and countries, to talk things up. And I've seen it in the workplace, where people would come back from a meeting. I go, how'd it go? They went, brilliant, really well, really well. 2 hours later, I get a phone call saying we're fired. That actually happened. We've got to get over this kind of obsession with just trying to cover stuff up and embellish it. It's Boris Johnson. He's the perfect example. Everything's great. Everything's wonderful. And really the fundamental problems don't get dealt with. So there are many schools who, to their credit, and many other institutions that aren't schools, to their credit, are actually being much more honest these days. And I hope and think that the last 5 years in England, in Scotland, has sent a message to people that they can't get away with it, because this is because they're living rent-free in our heads throughout life. And I've said to other people, in many ways, the abuse, you can actually get over the abuse. But to be denied the truth decade after decade, and then to be denied it by an inquiry or an investigation, that's the greatest offence of all.
Thank you, Giles. Yeah, I really hear that. Yeah, I think Boris Johnson is the sort of king of the ex-borders, if you like. Nick Duffel says it. Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? And I can see it in myself. I can see it in politics, in the legal profession, in the city, etc. You can see it, and we
Yeah,
obviously exported that as well. Exported that all over the world. It's remarkable. But the number
it's
of
that
cover up.
it's that old line of "it never did me any harm." Yeah, that's because you just passed it on to everyone else.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. But the number of cover-ups you reference, you talked to post office, blood scandal, Harrods, the church, Scouts. Dino Nocibelli was talking me through just the list of all these scandals that keep kind of unraveling. And we talked. This Prince Andrew right now is going on. At the point of recording this is still unraveling. Virginia Giuffre, grooming gangs. It's all unpacking. What's your
Yeah.
view on how that's unraveling now?
I think it's all a good thing. Tragically, too late in many cases, but it's a good
Mm,
thing. I think culture has changed since Savile, Weinstein, Epstein, all these people. Um, the what's that annoying guy with the long hair? The stand-up comedian. There's the people are being exposed in advance of being found guilty now. Now,
mm,
some might say, "Oh, that's terrible." I think it's great that survivors have had the confidence to come forward and name and shame folk. Um,
mm,
it's very rare that they're making it up. I believe the yew tree, was it, what's that house called again? There have been instances of people being sort of fantasists, but I can tell you now 99.9% of survivors are just people who want the story out there, you know,
mm,
and don't, and as someone wisely said, the truth is bad enough. You don't need to make anything up, you know.
mm, mm,
So it's, society has changed. The media's interest in all this stuff has changed. In the 1990s, the editor of the Scotsman newspaper, which is the heart of the high society establishment in Scotland, now only has about 2,000 circulation of 2,000 print, um, colluded with the governors of schools. And I'm not going to name them because they'll come after me at this stage, but they colluded with them to expose, humiliate, and intimidate whistleblowers who had raised concerns. So the media were on the side of the institutions at the time. They were in cahoots. And now very much, I mean, I'm grateful to the media. You've got great people like Marcello Mega, Mark Horn of the Times, Severin at the Guardian, and Libby at the Guardian, and the people from the BBC and STV and even the Daily Mail,
mm,
they are hugely sympathetic and they're on our side, not anyone else's.
mm,
So
mm,
things have changed. And then authorities are listening. The idea of walking into a police station to complain about things that happened to me at primary school 10 years ago, I'd have been laughed out the front door. I went into Hastings, which is nowhere near Scotland, to report non-recent crimes, and I was astonished at how kind and careful they were with me. So, I had someone who went in 2021 to a police station in Glasgow, and they said, "Son, we got murders to solve here, pal, not posh boys' problems." That's changed. That's changed, and that's good. So,
mm, mm, mm. I'm very pleased to hear that your experience with the Edinburgh Academy current administration has been positive. I think sadly we hear probably 10 to 15 schools a month that's seen and heard, various complaints, etc. And 14 and a half out of 15 of them are handling them very poorly. So I think
really,
there are a couple out there who are doing a reasonable job. Those
okay,
who understand that it's short-term pain for long-term gain, deal with it compassionately, quickly, in an open and transparent way, and it's got the best chance for the individual, but it's also, if they're trying to keep the place running and keep the place going, purely from a damage limitation perspective, it's a smart play if you want to take the human element out of it, which is, hard to do. But most of the schools still don't. They still close ranks. They still alienate survivors and say, "Oh, you're the only one," and we've not heard anything about this. And oh, that was the old guys because we've changed hands 3 times, we've changed the
yeah,
limited company 3 times, etc. So I don't see it changing from my end, but I'm very glad there are a number of schools out there who are facing into this.
I heard something on the radio the other day that they should be made to listen to. A man in Switzerland recently found out that his grandfather was Hermann Goebbels, and he had no idea. And he only found out because he was looking online, and his mother had hidden it from him. And he was interviewed, and he's the nicest guy you'll ever, nice as pie, and had no idea, and as horrified about it, but at the same time said, "Well, I'm not him." And what they need to realize is that Germans today are equally condemning of the actions of the SS back in the day, and there's no blame attached to the current management of the school. There's a bit of reputational damage, but so long as the children now are being treated properly and the parents are happy, it's a necessary fact of life to be dealt with. And the schools that do deal with it and confront it and side with survivors and help them get some form of resolution, and the majority, like if you watch the post office thing with Toby, what's his name? There's a point where he's giving a speech because they're all getting worked up about the money going on legal fees and things like that. It says, guys, hold on. Why did we get into this in the first place? To get the truth out there. And that's actually all that people want. So if today help people get the truth out, they probably won't get sued.
Yeah, I hear you.
With people who all we want to hear is that so-and-so was a bad person who did bad things, and we're not denying it. And you weren't alone. There were many. And that's what happened with the Academy. It's what, we were lucky in that sense. So just be humane and human. And if there's anything, I have a presentation on understanding survivors and how to handle them, which sits with the Scottish Council of Independent Schools, but it's also presented elements of it to the Council of International Schools and a charity called Keeping Children Safe. I'm very happy to set something up through Seen and Heard Online for any kind of any schools that aren't quite with the program, to show them that we're not dangerous, we're not scary, but we will be if you deny us.
Yeah, I really hear you. I think we're very much advocating a victim-centered code of practice for abuse complaint handling. Is the language around it, but trying to get that out there, trying to get the understanding that it's not to close ranks, not to protect the institution, not to hide, really, and use that technique. Oh, everything's okay. That was the old guys. It's not us anymore. And you should look at the photos of the children, having a great time. We need a truth and reconciliation within the industry, if you like, right across all of these institutions, not just independent schools or whatever it is, because at that point the healing can begin. I know that I'm a passionate advocate for the emotional healing side of things. If schools have people come forward, treat them humanely, offer counselling, offer therapy, pay for it, get people into support, and really take them through a process where they can be seen and heard, hence our name, then we can start to heal, and that rippling effect. You said at the start, abuse harms so many people. I can say firsthand, and from all the things I've seen, healing has a multiplier effect beyond that. So once one person starts to heal, it ripples out to family, community, world, etc. And so if we can start that healing process, that truth and reconciliation, then this can be something that doesn't impact the next generation as much.
No,
but
and then just to add to that, it's much worse than that, actually, the ripple effect, because I've read so many witness statements from people who've come from really disadvantaged backgrounds, who have turned to crime, who have been in prison, whose lives have been destroyed. And so many of these social ills crime, addictions, murders can be linked back to early years, formative early years. So from our kind of cozy middle classish sort of world, yes, it's great. The healing effect does ripple out. You're absolutely right. The focus should be very much so on those areas of social deprivation. Kids are just treated terribly because they are the root of many of society's evils and problems. And if you tackle that, you're heading other things off at the pass. But instead, the criminal justice system punishes people for being abused as children because of the bad life choices they make that happen to be against the law. I think had I not been from, my dad was an accountant in Paris. We had a reasonably comfortable life. I could have easily been out there and lashing out at society in the way that many of these poor people have. I don't mean poor in terms of poor. I mean,
I
I'm being
understand. Yeah.
sympathetic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. I think the research backs that up. The key determinant of these things is adverse childhood experiences and how many you've got of them. And
Yeah.
adverse childhood experiences affect people from all backgrounds, and that's why
Yeah.
there needs to be this trauma-informed approach. In schools, in society, it's improving. It is. I feel the upswing. I feel the change. As you said, 10 years ago, you were laughed out of a police station, and now much more likely to get a good hearing. And we're seeing it right now.
I had a video meeting back in July with a group of who were from sort of social work background, policy, government, and they at one point they started beating themselves up and talking about how badly they were failing and how much things needed to improve. And I did make the point. I said, guys, did a group like this exist in the 1970s? Don't kick yourselves. We didn't have people like you having these meetings in 1960, 1970, probably not even in the 1980s. So yes, there has been progress made, and it's going in the right direction.
Beautiful. Thank you, Giles. So as we bring things to a close, just wanted to check in, see if there's anything that you wanted to cover briefly that we haven't covered today, or any sort of final thoughts really to leave people with.
Other than there's a number of WhatsApp-based groups. We're not therapists. We're just people who've been through similar experiences, and everyone's welcome. And we've got boys, girls, men, women, and it seems to work for 99% of people. There's people. It's been described as a lifesaver by some people, and we're a very welcoming, friendly bunch. And if anyone wants to join them, just get in touch with Chris, and he'll give you the details. You can get in touch with me on easurvivors.info, and the contact details will also be on the report that will be published via Chris's organisation. And just for the record, if anything happens, I'll take the flak and go to prison for the content, Chris. Okay, it's here live.
Yeah, got it clear. But yeah, for everyone listening out there, in the show notes of this, if you're watching on YouTube, in the show notes, there will be the links to both of the reports. So last year's EA Survivors report and the new one coming soon, which I've had a sneak peek at, and it is an incredible piece of work. I mean, the time, the detail level, the humanity within it is remarkable. So I just wanted to honour you, the others that you've mentioned, many of them today. Philip and Alex Renton and Nikki and so many others that have contributed to your work, Neil to the report, etc. Beautiful work. It's a powerful read because I think it stirs energy to create change. So thank you for your time, your energy, your work in this area. All the info will be in the show notes. And yeah, let's call it a day there, Giles, because I know we have had so much to talk about. We could go for ages, but
We could go for weeks, but we won't.
yeah.
I don't listen to podcasts that are over an hour, to be honest.
Oh God, well we've really wrecked them today. So thank you.
Well, and thanks to you, Chris, for what you're doing, and I'm really pleased to see it's gaining momentum and growing all the time. You're doing a great thing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So if you're still with us, an hour and 25 minutes, bless you for listening. Thank you, Giles Moffatt, for your work, from the Edinburgh Academy survivors, all those out there who've experienced abuse. Our hearts are with you, and there are places to go. So go and ask for support, and you will be heard. So thank you. This has been the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I've been with Giles Moffatt. It's been a really great conversation, Giles. So we'll say goodbye now and see you on the next one. Thank you very much.
See you soon. Thanks, Chris.